The crowd in front of Buckingham Palace froze as if someone had turned off the sound. A moment ago, the air was filled with laughter, the clicking of cameras, and the excited voices of tourists from all over the world. But now there was silence. All eyes were fixed on the tall young Spaniard standing opposite the royal guard. The water bottle in his hand was empty. Its contents had just poured down the face of the motionless soldier, dripping down his immaculately ironed red uniform. A second, two, three. No reaction. The crowd began to whisper. Somebody gasped. The cameras kept rolling, but there was no more laughter. The Spaniard, let's call him Santiago, smirked, trying to pretend he had everything under control. But something had changed. He felt it. It was as if an invisible threat hung in the air. And suddenly, the guardsman took a step forward. One step. The sound of his boot hitting the stone slab sounded like a gunshot. And that was enough. Santiago's eyes widened. The confident smirk vanished from his face. His body stopped obeying him. The crowd retreated. Some held their breath. Parents instinctively pulled their children back. Someone muttered, Madre de Dios. But worst of all, the guardsman was silent. Didn't shout, didn't threaten, didn't make a sudden movement. Just a step forward. But that step changed everything. Santiago felt his heart thudding in his chest. For the first time in a long time, he felt fear. He wished he could pretend he didn't care, that this was just a game. But something about this silent soldier, his iron discipline, his absolute confidence in his actions, spoke louder than any words. The crowd already understood. Santiago had crossed a line that should not have been crossed. And now he was about to learn what happens to those who disrespect the royal guard. Santiago enjoyed the attention. London seemed like a city of opportunity, and he wasn't here to hang around with a crowd of ordinary tourists. He was used to people laughing at his antics, videotaping them, and posting them online. He considered himself the main character in any crowd. Today, he decided to take it a step further. Oi, Tio, look, he doesn't even blink. Santiago laughed, shoving his friend Raul with his elbow. Before them stood a royal guard, tall, with impeccable posture. His red uniform looked as if it had just been ironed, and the huge bare fur on his head gave him an almost inhuman appearance. He was like a statue, but alive. The crowd around him was taking pictures, videos, selfies. No one dared to get too close. Except Santiago. Hold the camera, bro. This is going to be legendary. He smirked, handing the phone to Raul. Raul was reluctant at first, but Santiago had already stepped forward. Señor Soldado, smile. He said loudly, waving his hand in front of the guardsman's face. Zero reaction. The people around him started to pay attention. Deaf or something? Santiago added, making a grimace. The crowd began to whisper. Tourists from other countries looked at him with displeasure. Don't be. An elderly man in an expensive suit muttered. He realized that something bad was about to happen. But Santiago only grinned. He pulled a bottle of water out of his backpack. Vamos, let's see if he's robot or human. Raul tensed up. Hey, man, don't. Relax. It's just water, buddy. He's not even moving. The crowd began to whisper louder. A few people pulled out their phones, anticipating a scandalous video. And Santiago splashed water right in the guard's face. Time seemed to slow down. Ice drops dripped down the soldier's impenetrable face. But he didn't even blink. The crowd gasped. People covered their mouths in horror. And then, the guardsman took a step forward. That step sounded like thunder. Santiago felt a cold wave run down his back. His foolish prank had turned into a nightmare from which he could not simply escape. The crowd froze. Just now the place had been noisy, talking, laughing, cameras clicking. And now, a sepulchral silence. The guardsman stood directly in front of Santiago. He didn't say a word, but his step forward changed everything. Now he wasn't just a living statue anymore. He was a soldier. Raul was still holding the phone, but his hands were shaking. He was no longer laughing. Hermano, he muttered. Santiago swallowed. He didn't understand why that one step made his heart pound like he had just come face to face with a predator. Vamos, buddy, you can't touch me. Santiago tried to grin, but his voice treacherously trembled. You're just standing there for the tourists, aren't you? The guardsman remained silent. But that silence was worse than any words. The crowd around him no longer looked amused. People were looking at Santiago differently now. Some whispered. Someone was shaking his head. Someone was already pulling out their phone, not for a funny video, but to capture what was about to happen next. And at that moment, The guardsman raised his right hand. Hostia. Raul exhaled. He realized that this was not just a gesture. It was a signal. From the side of the palace, two men in dark suits moved at the same moment. Guards. The crowd murmured. The men stepped back. Bro, let's go. Raul grabbed Santiago's arm. But Santiago froze. Panic was growing in his chest like a fire. I was just kidding. But no one was amused. The two guards approached quickly and silently. There was the same impeccable discipline in their movements as the guardsmen. Not an ounce of doubt. Santiago wanted to say something, but a firm hand rested on his shoulder. He turned sharply and met the eyes of the first guard. Come with us, sir. Espera, it was just a joke. Santiago felt an icy terror clutching his throat. The guard who grabbed his shoulder didn't even blink back. His stern face, his cold gaze, he was as motionless as Buckingham Palace itself. But his grip was ironclad. Come along. The crowd watched in tense silence. People no longer saw before them a self-assured Spaniard ready to entertain the public. Now they saw a man who had just realized he was in serious trouble. Raul, tell them something. Santiago twitched, but the second guard intercepted his wrist. Raul took a step back. His face read fear. Lo siento, hermano. He backed into the crowd like a rat leaving a sinking ship. Are you serious? Santiago couldn't believe his eyes. Just a minute ago, Raul had been his bro, making videos and laughing. But as soon as things got serious, he disappeared. Buddy, you don't think I'm serious. Santiago tried to break free, but the guards held tight. Jokes end where disrespect begins. The guard's voice was steady but hard as a rock. But he didn't say anything. Santiago turned back to the guard. The soldier stood still, his uniform still wet, but his silence now read absolute authority. Santiago felt tiny. Sir, you will be charged with disorderly conduct and contempt of the royal guard. Those words hit like a hammer. What? Santiago let out a loud gasp. But it's just water. You can explain it to the police. At that moment, someone's cell phone turned on, and a voice from the speaker in Spanish said, Tio, you just got arrested. Ha 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 ha. It was the video from the live broadcast. Santiago froze. Everything he'd done had already gone viral. Millions of people would see him crossing a line that was better not crossed. No, wait. We can just forget about it, right? Santiago was still hoping to pull out. Until a minute ago, he was the star of the crowd. He was the one being videotaped, the one in control. And now? He was being dragged toward the exit of the palace square, and the whole world was watching it live. The guards didn't respond. They acted quickly, coherently, without further ado. Hey, come on, I'm not a criminal, shouted Santiago, trying to stop, but he was pushed forward. The crowd parted. There was no more curiosity in their eyes, only judgment. You've had it. The man in the expensive suit shook his head. Now he would realize that the royal guards were not a circus. The middle-aged woman took the camera off her shoulder and slowly put it away. Santiago felt himself start to shake. This was nothing like he had imagined. He had thought he would make a joke, amuse people, and walk away with a round of applause. But now he was the object of ridicule. Raul? Raul had disappeared. His friends? Neither. They didn't scream. They didn't demand to let him go. They didn't run after him. They just erased him from their memories. Santiago looked around, and his gaze met the guardsman's again. He was still standing where he was. Silent. Motionless. But now his silence seemed like the loudest punishment of all. Santiago realized this man would not even remember his name, but he would never forget it. He was led on, and the crowd went back to their business as if nothing had happened. Only now. They looked at the guardsmen differently. Santiago no longer existed, but the lesson he had taught everyone around him would remain forever. Santiago barely resisted as the guards led him through the gate and away from the plaza. His legs moved automatically, but it was as if his mind had shut down. The crowd had already switched to other things. Tourists continued taking selfies, laughing, discussing the sights. But not the guardsman. He stood at his post again, just as still, just as impenetrable, as if nothing had happened. In the small interrogation room, Santiago sat staring at the wall. His cell phone was silent. Raul hadn't called. None of his friends had tried to find out where he was. The guard's words echoed in his head. You can explain this to the police. Santiago tried to believe it was all just a misunderstanding. It wasn't like he was going to offend anyone. But the more he thought back to that moment, the more he realized it wasn't just a joke. It was disrespect, to discipline, to history, to people who couldn't answer, but could teach a lesson stronger than any word. That one move of the guardsman said more than 1,000 lectures. A few hours later, Santiago walked out of the station. He was released, but with a warning. If he disturbed the order near the palace again, he would be banned from entering the country. He picked up his phone and saw hundreds of notifications. The video went viral. Thousands of comments. Another stupid tourist who thinks he can do anything. This is what happens when you don't respect other people's traditions. The guardsman didn't even blink, and this guy almost crapped his pants. Every view, every like. It wasn't glory. It was humiliation. In the feed, he came across footage taken half an hour after the incident. The guardsman was still standing at his post. Exactly the same. It was as if Santiago had never existed. Santiago turned off his phone and closed his eyes. Anger boiled in his chest, but he no longer knew who to direct it at. At the guards? At the guardsman? At the crowd that stood there filming without saying a word? Or at himself? He sat down on a bench by the subway, lowered his head and thought. Why had he done this in the first place? He wanted attention. He wanted everyone to laugh. He wanted the video to go viral on the internet and make him popular. Well, he got his wish. He went back to the hostel that evening. Raul was sitting on the bed pretending he wasn't here. Are you serious, bro? Santiago's voice was tired, without anger. Raul didn't even lift his head. What do you want to hear? How are you doing? Raul sighed, but never made eye contact. Dude, you set this up yourself. Why do you even do it? Santiago opened his mouth to answer, and hesitated. He didn't have an answer. He didn't understand. I thought it would be fun. Raul shook his head. Fun? He finally looked at Santiago. Have you seen the commentary? You're getting destroyed there. Santiago lowered his gaze. He thought had just put down funny. But now he wasn't a blogger. He wasn't a tourist. He was an example of how not to do things. And worst of all, he deserved it. The next day, he went to the palace again. But he didn't pull out his cell phone. He didn't laugh. He didn't try to make jokes. He just stood in the crowd and stared silently at the guardsmen. They didn't notice him. And Santiago realized they forgot about him the second it happened. But he himself would never forget it. It was a lesson that would not be erased from his memory. The guardsman's silence said more than 1,000 words.